All right, guys, welcome back to Establish the Pass podcast presented by ClutchPoints. I'm your host, Blake Lovell. With me, as always, my co-host, Dillon Reagan, back here to look at a wild weekend. I guess you could call it wild card weekend, Dillon, I guess you could say. Super wild card weekend, even, in the NFL. And, boy, there were some super wild games, to say the least. Now, we are recording this on Monday afternoon, meaning there's still a game to be played with the Cowboys and Bucks, but we will talk about that one on the next episode, as we usually do, now that they've introduced this playoff schedule here in the past couple of years. So, but Dillon, safe to say that Wild Card Weekend did not disappoint in terms of game quality, because there were a lot of close games, really outside of what? Well, there were a lot of close games that eventually got close.
Yeah.
Because some of them weren't close for a while, but and some were. But, yeah, it was certainly a wild weekend in the NFL.
Yeah, it was nuts. I mean, the only game that really played out according to the script that we kind of thought maybe was the Niners and Seahawks. Seattle, like you said, they kept that game close. The first half was entertaining, able to beat Ward deep on that one Metcalf touchdown. Metcalf obviously had a great game overall, but that was the only one that really went. I mean, maybe the Giants game kind of went like how I felt it could, but especially the Chargers game, obviously, could have seen the Jags winning, but the way they did, absolutely ridiculous. I mean, not that, after years of watching Chargers football, I know a lot of people have said this, but they're the one franchise you wouldn't be completely shocked with that kind of thing happening. But probably the most shocking games overall were the fact that Dolphins and Skylar Thompson playing like they did, honestly, with a few more catches here and there from some of his receivers, they could have come away with a victory in that one. And then the Ravens defense stepping up in just a huge way against the Bengals, and it took a miracle play for Cincinnati to win. That's the game, I think, if you look at like win expectancy based on all the stats, was the most unlikely winner of the weekend. Even the Bills, had a lot of things that went against them with fumbles and some weird wacky plays at certain moments. But man, that Ravens defense put on a heck of a performance, and just it took one play that now we're going to see on highlight reels about the playoffs for years and years to come.
Yep. Certainly a game-changing play. That is the one where, probably in the old Madden or NCAA college football games, that's one where the momentum meter goes from this side all the way back to the other side, and that's how it works. So, yeah, that was a wild sequence there late in that game. All right, but we're going to start by going back to our game of the week, and, I mean, we kind of nailed this one, Dillon. I mean, I don't know if, you can certainly compare. It didn't look like it, but we nailed it in terms of if you wanted pure drama and excitement. After about, 2 minutes left in the first half, things got exciting and they got dramatic. And that was, of course, the Jaguars 31, Chargers 30. Now, I said to you, Dillon, I wanted to go back, and I just forgot to do it. I forgot to go back and listen to exactly what I said. But I said, this feels like a Chargers game and I picked the Jags. This was one of my upsets.
Yep.
I said, I'm going to pick the Jags here because, to me, this feels like a game with the Chargers where it is a game with the Chargers. Now, little did I know that they were going to take it to a new level here by being up 27-0 in the playoffs and losing this game. But that's exactly what happened. Trevor Lawrence with one of the greatest stat lines of all time. 4 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. Just unbelievable. This game was just nuts. And we should have known all the other games were going to be pretty nuts. Not to that level, but it was a sign of things to come, because I still don't know. I mean, I know how the Chargers lost the game, but I still don't know how the Chargers lost the game because, again, they were in complete control. Lawrence just throwing the ball left and right to the wrong player, but yet the second half, the Jags do their thing, and most importantly, Doug Peterson does his thing. I know we've talked about this before, Dillon. This guy, to me, he's one of my favorite coaches, of the past decade. This guy just goes out, and he rolls the dice, unlike another coach that may or may not have been in the exact same game here. What a game. This was just nuts, and what a loss for the Chargers. This ranks up there all time, no doubt, for them. If not, I don't know. I'd have to go back and look at the whole list, I suppose. But an all-time loss for the Chargers, an all-time win for the Jags, and it's the Jags marching on to Kansas City.
I mean, it took so many different things to happen. There's some parallels. I was feeling like at moments in that second half, having flashbacks to the Buccaneers almost coming back to beat the Rams in the playoffs last year. The dread of blowing a huge lead and watching everything seem to go against you. But those games are very different, right? The Tampa Bay forced tons of turnovers. The Rams just kept basically giving them the ball back. The Chargers didn't turn the ball over. They just they end up, the fact that they were able to win the turnover battle 5-0, obviously it never happened in the playoffs before, and only a few times that it happened when it's gone +4 in another team's direction with them losing. But it just, man, I mean, the small things towards the end of the first half, time management, and the Jags end up getting that last touchdown, and you kind of felt like, all right, if they get that, it's not like this was a comeback that started as late as the 28-3 Super Bowl with the Falcons and Pats either. The comeback started at that point early in the second half. They have that long drive, but it just kind of was methodical, and that's the thing I believe Doug Peterson talked about after the game with Trevor Lawrence and their kind of expectation or how it all went. It wasn't like try to gain it all back at one moment. Just stick to what we know, stick to what we're able to play, who we are as a team, and they've done this to an extent all year, not to a 27-point game, but they're down 17 to Dallas, had a lot of big comebacks, and to Lawrence's credit, just methodical, not worrying about the moment. And by the end of it, the defense made some big plays as well. Obviously, they didn't look great in the first half, but really they've been put in some tough spots by their offense. And really, I mean, the drives in the second half, you look at like the charts and all the things. I know there's a lot said about the Chargers not running the ball enough, and I believe there's something to that, but they just couldn't run the ball well enough. And I think that's a question about themselves and their identity and what they need to figure out, because, I mean, in these moments, as much as we want teams to throw in, and we see them and some of the games with the Giants later, not necessarily just sitting on the running the ball, they threw to kind of set up the pass. The Chargers they did that, and then they couldn't run. They established the pass fine, and then they could not close it off. And just, they still had obviously a bunch of just different chances. You're talking about the difference in the coaching philosophies. It's like Staley was the aggressive guy, and now you have these 4th and shorts, and you're kicking field goals to still stay up by 2 scores against a team that's putting the ball in the end zone constantly at that point. And man, it just, so many things had to happen, but like you said, it's the Chargers. They got away with some flags. They also had some stupid flags themselves, and the offside on the sack. I know Bosa didn't think he was offside, and it was really close. But then, to allow them to get that 2-point conversion after that penalty. I mean, just things that we've been seeing the stuff with the tackles leaving early, and even Mike Pereira kind of talked about it during the Giants-Vikings game. This isn't. Yeah. If it's within the certain line of reason, it's just, if they're not going to call it, it's good technique to start.
That, we've seen that so much, and I don't know that was that different. Yeah.
Yeah, so. If they want to change the rule and start calling it, they can, that would have to happen in the regular season. But if you watch enough games in the regular season, that's happening pretty consistently, as long as it's within that, half beat or whatever it is. And there's some linemen on Twitter, former Mitchell Schwartz and some guys talking about it too, in terms of that's just kind of, if they're allowing you to, your cadence is lined up almost perfectly. It gives you a little advantage. You're going to take it, just like DBs take advantages with certain things they pull. So anyway, to lose your composure in that moment, it makes for some, funny videos for overall fans with, Staley handing the helmet back to Bosa, him throwing it back down. But if you're a Chargers fan, man, they've had obviously some brutal losses, like you mentioned, over the course of their history, and even the recent history since we've really watched Chargers football. I think of some of their years where they had dominant teams that disappointed against the Patriots and the Jets in the playoffs or in the 2000s. But this is a different kind of hurt than that. There's a difference between feeling like you missed out on that window as a championship team, as some of those ones did. I think Charger fans still have confidence in some of the players they have, but it is such a psychological warp to go from up 27-0 and just watch it all slip away like that. I feel bad for Charger fans, I know, because I felt that dread, like I said, at the end of the Rams-Bucks game last year, and I was like, they're really going to blow this, and it felt like, man, we're really going to miss that chance, and then sure enough, they pull it out, and you just felt like the Chargers had those moments where they could. Some criticism of Herbert may be fair, but I think some of the play calling, and I know Joe Lombardi's if Staley ends up staying as the Chargers coach, it feels like Lombardi's going to be the fall guy, because the average distance per target in that whole game for Herbert was like 6 yards or something. I don't know how you
This
look
makes
at
sense.
him.
Yeah.
I know Mike Williams is out and how much that hurts them, and we talked about that leading up to the game, but I don't know. It's some questionable things happening from the play calling point of view of the Chargers and the Jags. Like you said, to Doug Peterson's credit, every adjustment he needed to make happening all the way to that last 4th and inches play call with the T-bone formation, the sweep, and getting into the situation that I think Ben Solak from the Ringer pointed out in their regular season matchup. They did the same kind of thing. They'd pull the guard and the tackle from that side and basically get a one-on-one with the running back in a smaller corner, and they didn't expect him to make the play, and sure enough, he couldn't get up the field and tackle him, and that ends up changing the game. So, yeah, Doug Peterson and the Jags, they got nothing to lose, so it should be fun to watch them next weekend in Kansas City. I know we'll get to that more, but just a fun team, and I just hope they can put together maybe a more complete game because maybe then they'll have a shot at least in that one.
All right, so our betting locks for the week, we both nailed them, but I just took the push, Dylan, because I said the Bengals, I think, they're 7-point favorites at home against the Ravens. I was like, I like that number. Now, before we stop recording, you're like, well, this number's at 8. I said, nope, I'm taking it at 7. So, yep. Dylan, I would like to technically take my victory lap here for this, although it's more of just a lap for no reason. I'm not gaining or losing anything. But the Bengals do win by 7, 24-17. As we said earlier, obviously the game completely changes with the 98-yard fumble return for a touchdown. And again, just one of those plays that you're just not going to forget because of how much it changes everything. If it's a touchdown for the Ravens, it completely changes the whole dynamic of the game. Instead, it goes all the way back the other way. Bengals get the win. I think, in hindsight, even without Lamar Jackson, the Ravens, they're going to play it tough. I think just with the way they play defense, and you kind of saw that here. I actually think, certainly when you look at kind of how they played, I thought Tyler Huntley played fine, did a lot of good things, but at the end of the day, it's just kind of one game, or excuse me, one play just changes the game, and that's exactly what we had here.
They the Ravens had kind of taken over in the second half. They gave up the one, long touchdown drive where the Bengals went back up by 17-10 score, got the 2-point conversion, but really they did nothing on offense in the second half against that Ravens defense. They had about as good of a football game as you could have hoped from them. Held them to, a field goal on that first early drive. Obviously, the missed extra point ends up hurting the Bengals to get it back with the 2-point. But to hold them to 234 yards. I mean, if we had known that going into the game, I would have thought the Bengals probably lost. And sure enough, that's why this is the game, as we mentioned, that had the win expectancy based on all the everything that happened in the game was 33%. And obviously that's why this is the case. You have a 14-point play swing with the Sam Hubbard return there. A great play by Logan Wilson. I don't know, from that far out, as everyone pointed out, how are you having, it's not like this is Trevor Lawrence at the half-yard line. This is almost a yard and a half, or a little more than a yard at least. And Huntley just not that's the size as Trevor. So it's a tough ask for him, especially with the way that you've been running the football fine. I mean, the Bengals defense had been able to stifle it a bit. You kind of saw them giving up some yards in the passing game towards the end of the game because they wanted to still stop the run. But in that moment, I mean, it was, you had still a couple chances there, at least through fourth down, obviously down a touchdown, or at the time tied. I mean, I think they would have stayed aggressive and still gone for it on fourth down potentially. So, man, it's just a brutal break for a team that, like you said, Tyler Huntley played, more than well enough. He had a wide open receiver with the Robinson touchdown. And but overall, I mean, that was a big thing going into. We didn't know if he was going to be able to even play a full game. There was something about him playing and Anthony Brown, and luckily Tyler played the whole game because he gave them as good of a chance as you could have hoped. The script was all there. The defense again, made all those plays. Joe Burrow wasn't able to attack all the time. Obviously, he's going to get you at some moments, but I still thought Joe played pretty well in the first half. It was like, man, they're only up 9-0, and then sure enough, the Ravens score right before the half and end up getting the ball back. So, it's a tough game for them because, man, you look at how strong this roster is for the Ravens, and we've talked up the Bengals as we should, and they're still a really good team. It's not like, and I know some people have pointed this out, as much as there's criticism of the Bengals and Bills just scraping through. You look at some of the games towards down the stretch of the regular season. The Chiefs went to overtime with Houston. The Niners barely beat the Raiders. These games are going to happen. These are still NFL teams, and I think Baltimore is kind of a wake up call. We went into some of these games this weekend, and the next one we're going to talk about not so much, but most of these games this weekend thinking in a lot of cases, Bengals will cruise, Bills will cruise, and it's just not the case. And Baltimore, a good wake up call. The playoff football is just a different breed, and Bengals a little lucky to get away with it. Not that they didn't make some good plays at certain moments, but man, I think they'll just wipe the sweat off their brow and move forward, and be happy that they don't have to play another team from their division again this postseason.
Well, your betting lock hits in fine fashion, although did not look great, as mine did not early on. Niners take care of business against the Seahawks, 41-23. You said, the Seahawks got off to about as, they get off to a bad start, but then they're able to kind of rally and take a 1-point lead heading into halftime.
Yep.
And so at that point, you're thinking, all right, we've rallied from 10-0 down. You take the lead in halftime, feeling pretty confident about your chances, but then, everything sort of changes. That third quarter just could not get anything going, and really could not get anything going the rest of the way outside of what was basically a throwaway touchdown with 2 minutes to go. So really just could not muster anything on that side of the ball in the second half. And again, you kind of look at everything for the Niners, and I think it goes back to this, Dylan, like just when you have a guy like, Deebo Samuel that can just make those kind of plays, like that's always the thing with the Niners. It seems like that's what we said about them, right? They just got so many guys you feel like can break off a big play. Obviously the one he made late in the game, that took it to a 3-touchdown type game, but even Christian McCaffrey had close to 70-yard run or something like that, or it's just, again, that's to me is what you look at with the Niners now, is they've just got so many guys that can break off different big plays, and how that sort of changes the game for them. And, Brock Purdy throws three touchdowns, no interceptions, rush for one. Yeah, this was about what you expected outside of maybe it being a closer game than you thought it would be at halftime.
Yeah, the second half was exactly what we kind of expected from this one. We went in talking about how Seattle had struggled defending the run, and sure enough, some of the lanes, I was really glad that Fox went to the behind kind of Madden angle almost, like the all-22 angle you see from the vertical part of the field, because they're open up huge holes. And when you have guys like Christian McCaffrey that aren't used to getting those holes before they got to San Francisco necessarily all the time, great things happen. The amount of, combination of scheme and personnel, and there's a lot of conversation on each end of Brock Purdy, how much is his own contribution. I thought, there's going to be some mistakes. He looked a little shaky in the first half, but for the most part, did everything you could have asked for. Also had that drop by Ayuk in the corner of the end zone on perhaps the best play he'd made all game. Not the best throws at all the time, but it doesn't necessarily need to be, especially when you have the playmakers they do, and guys like, as you mentioned, Deebo breaking that one off, but you also have Brandon Ayuk and George Kittle blocking down the field and just dominating guys. Everyone's bought in fully on this team. On defense in the first half, they're playing some press coverage, playing up. It worked the first couple drives. They get burned once, but after that, they really defended really well the rest of the game. I know there was some conversation going in about Lenore, one of the corners for the Niners, being the guy that they're going to try to exploit. He ends up playing a better game than the Wards, ends up getting a pick early in the second half that kind of, right when it was, I think at the time it might have been 31-17, gets the Niners the ball right back, and it's just like you feel like the game's almost over with those kind of back-to-back turnovers by Seattle. Seattle had to be basically perfect the whole way after that, from halftime on, if they wanted to have a chance here. They did drive down, after San Francisco took the lead to start the half and had a chance. You're getting pretty close to tied up, and it just takes one play from that line, from that defensive front, and Armstead gets there, and Bosa recovers the fumble, and it's just, you feel like just one mistake is all it takes for the Niners to capitalize. It can be maybe a more interesting matchup with them facing off, especially if they get Dallas, depending on what happens tonight. If they get Tampa too, they did beat down Tampa a couple of weeks ago, but I think things could be different with that game this time. But regardless, though, the Niners are a force. I think that's we talked about it going into the postseason, and outside of that one kind of blip game against the Raiders, where it felt like maybe they just didn't, completely buy that Vegas was going to give them as big of a punch. Outside of that, they really have looked like the best team in the NFL for the last half of the season, even with Brock Purdy in there. And it's just credit to Shanahan. It's credit to the roster they've built, to the playmakers they have, and to what Brock's been able to do with, he can't change the circumstances. He was given a great roster and a great coaching staff around him, and I think he's as ready as you could have hoped for the last round of the last pick of the draft to be in that spot. He has really, in my mind, you don't have to say that he's as great as some of these other quarterbacks. I think you should acknowledge though that he's still. There's a reason they've been putting up more points and looking like a more explosive offense, and even when Garoppolo is playing. So I think he's played pretty well.
All right, 2 upsets of the week. As I said, mine was officially the Bucs over the Cowboys. That was a 2.5 point spread, although I did at least get the Jags beating the Chargers at an upset there. But the official one, we will have to wait on. You'll know whether I got it right or not listening to this podcast. But Dylan did get his correct, because that's the Giants heading to Minnesota, getting the win over the Vikings, 31-24. I mean, in all honesty, as you're watching this game, you kind of just based on how the rest of the weekend's played out, you're just kind of like, well, just waiting for kind of the Vikings maybe to overtake things. But I tell you, Dylan, there got to a point where I'm just like, I don't think the Vikings are going to win this game. And I don't know if that came to me probably in the third quarter when it goes 24-14. Of course, Minnesota winds up tying it up. But even then, I'm just like, you just felt like the Giants had their number here, and just every turn, even some of those big plays like late, right, where I think there's a couple third downs, I want to say late in the game there, where Giants just able to convert on some of those and really just kind of keep the clock where they needed it to be. Meanwhile, I don't know what the Vikings are doing on the final play there. I still don't know. I still can't comprehend. A lot of people have had a lot of theories on that. I have no idea what they're doing on that final play, with Cousins throwing the ball to, what was it, Hawkinson? Is that, for basically 3 or 4 yards on a need to get 8 scenario. And I don't know what Cousins saw. I don't know what the plan was there, but it was not what they needed, because the Giants get their first playoff win, I think, Dylan, is it 11 years?
Since Super Bowl 46, they said.
Yeah, long time. Yeah, so it's been a long time. So what a win for the Giants, and as we'll talk about in the next episode, that sets up the NFC showdown with the Giants and Eagles. And meanwhile, the Vikings, a team that everyone thought was kind of, as you've mentioned, Dylan, the computers just did not love the Vikings. They sort of thought they were way more towards the middle of the pack rather than a 13-4 team, and well, they're packing it up for this season.
Yeah, kind of. Game, as I mentioned, kind of at the top. This game went maybe the closest to what I felt like it would, but honestly, still, I didn't expect the Giants to have as many explosive plays. It looked like, at times you're watching like a college football game where there's broken coverages and stuff, and it was crazy. Like, guys were running wide open in the first half, and even on one of their second half drives. But when they had to be more methodical, to your point, every big third down felt like the Giants were able to convert. The Vikings, to their credit, kept it close. It kind of did what they've done all year. You're like, how are they only down 3 like at halftime?
Yeah,
and different things like that. They weren't able to stop the run. They weren't able to stop Daniel Jones throwing or running himself. The defense, I think, for the Vikings, may be the most disappointing part of the season overall. I thought they'd be a better fit than this, but man, they were struggling big time. It's a credit to the play calling from Dable and what the Giants have been able to do this season with the personnel that they have. And I think if you're a Giants fan, you couldn't be more excited, as we've kind of talked about, just of the future. You're playing with house money right now. You weren't supposed to be here. You are. Make the most of it. And now, but you look at the roster, you still have so much room and growth to build from with Dable there. Just it feels like this team, even if they, who knows what happens next year, you don't have to worry about that. But I think as they continue to draft some of these pieces, I feel like they're heading in the right direction, clearly. Minnesota still have, they have a lot of great playmakers. I think they have some things in the offensive line to address. Dexter Lawrence completely ruined that game up front for them. They were not really able to run the ball much. They're also down a lot, so it forced them into a lot of passing situations. That last play, to your point, I don't know if he thinks Hawkinson's going to have a chance to break the tackle, but I mean, you got to at least throw it up. But it was another play again where there's interior pressure, and it was kind of it's not just Kirk Cousins. A lot of quarterbacks that struggle when you're able to get pressure up the middle of the field. I think it just over time wore him, and he kind of just checked down instead of trying to just throw one up at the end there. Hawkinson overall had a great game. I think that the Vikings did some good things on offense, and that's the only reason that we're tied late. Where they're able to have a few opportunities here and there where maybe the game, a couple bounces go their way. It just finally, after all those one-score games that they've won, they finally had one where it's just every bounce didn't go their way. The Giants, like to your point though, they were the better team in this football game. I think the win expectancy numbers from ESPN were similar to what the Ravens were, around 66%. Except in this case, the Giants actually were the one that comes out on top. And now it sets up the scenario that I mentioned, going into the playoffs. I wanted to happen. I like the idea of a Giants-Eagles rematch with them fully forced, not sitting everyone like they did in Week 18 with Jalen, hopefully healthier. I thought that early season matchup just was a little bit before the Giants started to hit their real stride. And now I think regardless of who wins the game tonight, by the time you're listening to this, you'll know. A Cowboys-Niner matchup, really fun, obviously, great playoff game last year. Or you get Tom Brady playing back in his hometown against a team he grew up rooting for in the Niners. So both scenarios work out great. And for the Giants, their fan base, it's been a long time waiting, so they should be happy with anything that happens here on out. It's got to be a great feeling to go into the season not knowing what to expect, being excited maybe about Dable, but man, I think they've gone even beyond the expectations you could have hoped for.
Well, the final game on our list we easily thought would probably be the most one-sided game of the bunch, perhaps. That was the Bills and Dolphins. Turned out to be anything but. Bills escape with a 34-31 win over the Dolphins. What a game this was, because this one started off about what you expected, right? Once again, a team gets up big. Buffalo's up 17-0 about midway through the second quarter. Then the momentum starts to swing, and of course some of that comes off of turnovers and such, but it did swing, and it goes back in the favor of the Dolphins, who actually led this game until about midway through the third, and then they closed the gap to make it a field goal game with about 10-11 minutes left in the fourth. And then, Dylan, the play that everyone's talking about, or I guess the lack of play that everyone's talking about, the delay of game late for the Dolphins on a 4th and 1. It's again, that's one of those plays, and this one's not as sexy, of course, because it's a delay a game call, but it's one of those that you're going to think back on and just say, boy, what happens if they get a playoff, and, who knows? But for that to happen, I think it's just, oh my goodness, like you talk about the worst possible time to get a delay a game penalty. It was that situation where you're at 4th and 1 on your own 48 with a drive to potentially tie or win the game. That's what happened for the Dolphins, but I mean, give the Dolphins credit, right? They come in with their third-string quarterback, which I know his numbers were not great, but at the end of the day, they were right there with a chance to, again, be on a go-ahead or game-tying drive. Was not the best game for the Bills by any means, but Dolphins came in, played this a lot tougher, and took advantage of some of those mistakes. And, I mean, Bills had, 4 turnovers, I think, or was it more than that?
At least 3.
Turnovers did they have in this game? Let's see. Bills had 3 turnovers. Okay, that's it. Because one of the fumbles I don't think was a lost fumble. So, I mean, Dolphins took advantage and made it a game, but Bills hold on. But man, this was another wild one.
It didn't feel like it early on. It wasn't, the same as the Jags-Chargers where we felt like it was going to be a close game. We thought the Bills would roll, and it's 17-0, and you're like, oh, even though they had that missed touchdown where the ball barely hit the ground on the throw over the middle of Dawson Knox, you're like, this isn't, what are the Dolphins going to be able to do? And, I mean, Skylar Thompson easily played his best game since he's had the takeover at certain points of the season with Tua and then Teddy out. Wasn't still that pretty. As kind of mentioned, this game still, I think, win expectancy-wise was like 89% Bills. They did outgain Miami by 200 yards, basically, a little under, like 192 yards. They only lose the turnover battle by 1, but obviously a sack fumble is going to be, for a touchdown, is going to be a little different than most turnovers that you have. Some others that set up Miami towards the end of the half with the touchdown they were able to get right before the Bills got a field goal to tie, to ultimately ends up being the difference. But at the end of the second quarter, you still saw the explosiveness of Josh Allen. At times, the play calling, and you do wonder. I mean, obviously, Ken Dorsey's had some people be fans of him. I don't know if it's all him, if it's something plays that are just Allen too, missing some throws, trying to make too much of what he's given in those situations. It just felt like they're playing, as people were joking, like it felt like at times there is a kid on Madden just throwing the ball deep constantly. With some of what was happening, they ran the ball pretty well, and at times just didn't stick to it. It was just an interesting kind of game. All the moments, the pressure points where the Dolphins needed something to happen to stay in it seemed to happen until late in the game, as you mentioned. I think that possibly, compared to the two other games yesterday that had like more methodical drives and long periods of the clock coming off. Obviously, this game almost took 4 hours and got the Giants-Vikings game pushed back. There were 31 total drives. I was counting it up when, just looking at this box score. I mean, I think potentially at the end there, everyone's like, does Mike McDaniel not have something ready? I mean, they'd already run all their stuff. Like, they'd maybe use some of the plays that they were going to use in that spot. I think maybe they overthink it by not just sneaking. I don't know. Maybe Buffalo still stuffs them. Yeah. But just so many things that the Dolphins could have done. But at the same time, you can't take too much away from them because no one gave them a chance. So I think, Mike McDaniel, give him credit for getting this team ready, feeling like they had the belief to win this one. A few catches here and there by Waddle and Hill. Maybe things go differently for them, but ultimately the better team still won. I think Buffalo, we'll see if hopefully they adjust and put up a better effort. Because if they play like this against Cincinnati, I don't know if they're going to be able to come out on top as they did in this one.
Well, those are your matchups. As we said, we will talk more about the Cowboys-Bucks game in our next episode as we preview the next round. But, Dylan, we know the matchups that are set now. As we said, it'll be Jacksonville heading to Kansas City. Cincinnati heads to Buffalo. The Giants head to play the Eagles. And, again, either Cowboys-Bucks on the road to San Francisco. But, of course, we got it all covered, Dylan, the fallout from the wild card round and looking ahead to the next round as well, the playoffs over Clutch Points. Let everybody know where they can find all that.
Yeah, you can follow the rest of the NFL playoff games in the Clutch Points app and our streams there. Yeah, tons of coverage of all the breakdowns of fallout with the press conferences for these teams that fell out of it, even the teams that are moving forward. Obviously, injury updates as we move forward with some of the availability of certain players on these teams moving through the playoffs. All that covered. Still a lot of coaching carousel stuff. I'm sure we're going to have a ton of stuff now with Lamar Jackson and rumors and all that good jazz. It's already J.K. Dobbins comments. If you haven't read them, go to Clutch Points and look up Dobbins. You'll get some interesting stuff that he had to say about the end of the game last night. But yeah, tons of NFL stuff on Clutch Points. Also, follow NBA games as always. Lots of college basketball coverage on our website now, more so than ever. I'm still doing a lot of college football stuff on recruiting and whatnot. But yeah, good stuff. Fun weekend. Hopefully the game that you'll have watched by the time you listen to this will also live up to expectations, and then I think we move forward to potentially my favorite weekend of the year. Divisional weekend's always a great time.
Yep, divisional round should be a lot of fun. A lot of great matchups we said already set. So be sure to check out everything at Clutch Points. You can follow all that. And as always, be sure to subscribe to the podcast. Any podcast app you use, search for Establish the Pass. Thanks as always for listening to the podcast, and we'll talk to you next time here on the Establish the Pass podcast.